I hope you're being challenged by the great divorce and reading it, marinating, thinking, looking in the mirror, letting God challenge you. We're going to be in chapter 5. We'll allude to 6 and 7, but we can't cover everything. I wish we could, but we're taking bite-sized pieces out of it. This one, we're titling it the Apostate. And I'll talk about in a minute what that means and alludes to. But most of the chapters are going to deal with sins that we pretty well are familiar with or recognize as a sin. It's easy to recognize hatred and murder and anger or lust and the sin of lying and whatever. We can recognize the outward sins, but there's a category of sins that most of us probably don't see it as sin. This individual in the chapter didn't. He's called an Episcopal ghost in the chapter. So no harm on, for all I know, C.S. Lewis could have been an Episcopalian, probably was. He's an Anglican in England. So, but he's not trying to put a cast dispersion on a particular denomination. It could have been a Vineyard ghost, so a Baptist ghost, a Methodist ghost, and a Catholic. It does all the same. That he was a theologically minded leader, teacher of the Bible, and Satan loves. Now he doesn't bring this out. But Paul talks about Satan masquerading as a messenger of righteousness, as an angel of light. And he disguises himself. And one of the best disguises is the thing that looks the most like the truth. And that there's a horrible, horrible, destructive effect that can happen when you have a leader that is teaching the Bible. It happened in our of a recent nature in the last decade, where a very, very popular teacher to young people, especially, who came out and wrote a whole book that kind of alluded to that in the end everybody's saved. Well, even C.S. Lewis says, I would pay any price to be able to say that in the end everybody will be saved. But if you have conviction, if you have integrity to the truth, you have to go by what God says. And the Bible doesn't say in the end everybody will be saved. The Bible says in the end, only those that embrace Christ and turn from their sins will be saved. Now, you can go by what you feel and think, like this guy in the story, or you can go by the Word of God. Now, in the story, he gets off the bus and he's kind of along on this holiday day tripper to come check out, explore heaven. And he's met by an individual that he knows named Dick. And so Dick meets him and he goes, oh, hey, how's it going? And Dick begins this conversation with him about, do you know where you've been? And he's not aware in his mind that he's in hell. This is the deceptiveness that he's alluding to. Again, this isn't meant to be literal, that people in hell wouldn't. This is meant to be the power of deception. And so Dick mentions heaven and hell, and he says, oh, I see, you're still just like you always were, and you've become worse. You're just a narrow-minded believer. And you'll hear that to people. Now, there are narrow-minded believers, if you want to use the term of harsh, judgmental, arrogant, prideful. There can be Christians like that. But what he means is that you're narrow-minded in a truth sense, that you're not leaving room for many roads to lead to heaven. And so the enemy loves to put on us something as though we should be embarrassed by the truth. No, the truth is, God said, Jesus said, there's one road that leads to life, and it's the road through the cross, it's the road through Jesus. So he meets this guy, and so he's challenging him, and he's saying, well, God would certainly never judge someone that has honest opinions. And this is what he hides behind, his honest opinions, his sincere opinions, as though sincerity can transform an opinion into truth. There are people that sincerely believe that they had a voice that told them to kill their wife. They sincerely, and maybe they did hear a voice, but it wasn't Jesus. And there are people that do sincere things. I had a guy one time cut his finger off and wrapped it up in a piece of meat wrapper and gave it to his estranged wife and trying to make amends to her. He was sincere, but he was an idiot. And it went from healing her heart to her putting a restraining order on him. So he looked at me and he had his whole hand bound up and wrapped up. He'd taken a meat cleaver and chopped off his finger. And I'm like, dude, everything in me wanted to say, you're an idiot. I might have said that, so I don't do counseling, but I'm like, you're a moron. If you'd have asked the bag boy at a grocery store, do you think my wife would appreciate a finger cut off, wrapped in a bag? No, sincerity doesn't transform deception or a lie into the truth. So in this interaction, an apostate is one that once professed, that once said they were a follower. He once was a believer in the Bible. And there are many out there that have said, well, yeah, I used to believe that stuff, but then I became enlightened. I became educated. I went to college. I heard those of greater knowledge. And there is a sin of intellectualism. Jesus says it in his word through the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. The message of the cross is foolishness to those that are perishing. But see, you've got to understand, he's not saying that they're stupid. The Bible says in Psalms, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. The fool. He's not saying fool as in an uneducated, mentally challenged individual. He's talking about a moral ignorance, because moral ignorance is what brings blindness to mental ignorance. And so God's word says that the message of Jesus, it's stupid to people, foolish. God says in verse 19, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. Why? Because that wisdom is holding them captive to lies that are keeping them from heaven. And to destroy it, to let it collapse on them, is mercy, not God being evil. It's God setting them free. The intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. And he asks, where's the wise man? Verse 20, where's the scholar? Where's the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. Don't miss that. God designed the gospel that it's not by intellectualism and the wisdom of this world that you discover the realities of God. It's through humility, repentance, brokenness, as we'll see in a minute. It's becoming like a little child. And God says it was through the foolishness of preaching he chose to save the lost. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death, Proverbs says. Seeming right doesn't make it right. So this guy's arguing with this, and he can't grasp that there's intellectual sin. Sins of the intellect, the arrogance of I'm smarter than the Bible. I'm, in essence, smarter than the God revealed in the Bible. It's a danger for anybody that has a hunger to grow in knowledge, because knowledge can take you off and become something that takes the place of a relationship with God. In fact, in one place, the guy says, the apostate says, well, maybe if I go to heaven, I can get all my questions answered. And I love this. The guy, Dick, that's the Bible believer, looks at him and says, no, you don't get it. Heaven's not a place for questions. Heaven is the answer. You get to see the face of God. Basically, he's quoting Revelations 22, verse 4, which encapsulates all there is to know about heaven. You know, people use questions as excuse. Now, there are sincere questions. And he spoke that to this guy. He said, do you remember, he told the apostate, remember in your earlier days where you were more childlike, that you asked questions that you truly wanted the answers to? And there's nothing wrong with a question. I have multitudes of questions. But it's when those questions become an obstacle to your faith. It's when your questions become excuses to not believe. You know, I've often heard, you could say to someone, and do it sincerely, but people that ask you hard questions, and I have no intimidation to say to people, that's a hard question. I don't really know the answer to that, but I do know this, and I tell them the simplicity of the love of God, the death of Jesus on the cross. But I've often said to people, well, if you could, and here, this will pull back the curtain. And it's kind of what C.S. Lewis is doing in this story. But if, and I can't, but if I had the divine wisdom, God gave it to me for a few moments, that you could ask me any question that's hindering you from trusting in Jesus. If I could answer every one of those questions with incredible clarity and with clear understanding, if I could answer all your questions, would you at that moment get on your knees, go before Jesus Christ, and surrender your life to Him? I've literally said this to people before, and their response is no, I would not. Because they just come up with more questions. The question becomes a theological excuse or a intellectual excuse. Well, what about all the people that haven't heard? My answer to people like that is, I can't answer for them, but I can answer for you. You've heard, and you're accountable. And God will hold you accountable to what you've heard. So in this apostate, he's offered, then he says, well, if I can't get my question, maybe there's things I can do and be useful in heaven. He stops him. He says, Dick stops the apostate, says, oh, wait a minute, let me just help you. God doesn't need you. There's nothing you have that's needed in heaven. And it just threw this guy into this quandary of what? I can't, what? No, there's nothing. If you think God needs something, you have possessions, talents, but everything came from Him. This guy forgot that the gifts that he had, the talents that he had, they belonged to God. And God's just getting them back. And God doesn't need anything he has. And then I love these words of Jesus. Look in Matthew 18 with me, because he tells him in this story, he says, you have to become more childlike to the apostate. He's become the adult, the intellectual, the person with all the great and difficult questions. But Jesus says it this way. In Matthew 18, he has a little child in verse 2, and he has him stand among the disciples. And he says, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like one of these children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, verse 4, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. That's a challenging for our again, knowledge is a wonderful thing if it leads you into a deeper obedience with God, into a deeper relationship with Christ, being more Christ-like, to grow in the knowledge of knowing God, not just knowledge about the Bible. There are many teachers in seminary, and it's sad. They don't believe this is the Word of God. They're teaching young men and women, you can't take this at its face value. You got to, intellectually take it apart and dissect it. And they're judging the Bible instead of looking into the mirror of the Bible and having it judge them. Intellectual sins are destructive. Look in the mirror and see where you might have some of these excuses that you have in your mind, or these arguments that you've had. And he brings out the fact that you didn't come by these opinions just on your own, because he calls them honest opinions. But he said, no, to be honest, You came by these opinions based on the atmosphere of that age, of the teachers that you got around, of the books that you read, of the professors that you had. And think of it this way. In Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, I think this is what he was getting at in this chapter. Again, there's no direct verses that C.S. Lewis alludes to, but in this sense of opinions don't just happen. They're acquired. You went looking for them. You chose to stop listening to the truth because you didn't want to believe that. You didn't want it to be true. And so you wanted to find alternatives. And Paul says this in Thessalonians. It's in the context of the false prophet that'll work miracles and tell lies. And in that context, he says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10, and every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. This is the counterfeit. He's doing all kinds of evil things among those that are perishing. They perished, get this, they perish because they refused to love the truth and be saved. Salvation seems stupid. They didn't want to love Jesus. They didn't want to love the cross. They didn't want to love the resurrection. This guy in the story brags about preaching against the resurrection. There are teachers that brag about how heroic they are to challenge that hell can't be real. It can't be literal. That's old, prehistoric, that's caveman theology. That's the theology of fear. And so they create all these worlds of ideas, but it's grown out of a resistance, a refusal, a choice to not believe what God says. And he says it opens the door. They perish because they refuse to love the truth, to embrace what God says, to value it. And he says this, verse 11, for this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. Now don't miss that. God let the delusion come only because they slammed the door. They slammed the Bible shut. They mocked the things of God. Their choices created this vacuum that the lies came based on the refusal of the truth. Paul says in Romans 1:18 that people suppress what they know to be true. They literally push it down so that they can believe a lie. And they don't want accountability. They don't want to have a great white throne judgment and answer to God. They don't want heaven and hell to be real. Well, I could say, I don't want it either. But me not wanting it doesn't mean it's not real. And me wishing it wasn't true doesn't change the fact that it is true. Your sincerity can send you to hell because you're believing a lie, because you refuse to surrender to the truth. You refuse to become more childlike. At one point in the story, he tells this man, if you could just become childlike and follow me into the mountains. And he begins to walk a little further and his feet hurt. And he said, yes, I know that the ground and the grass can be hard on you, but as you walk closer, your feet will harden. You'll be able to keep progressing. You'll become more solid because you're believing the truth. And he's trying, but he says, this guy, I know that reality is harsh. Waking up to you've believed a lie. Waking up that you've been in arrogant intellectual sin. Waking up, and he said, he literally uses the word, he says, reality is harsh to the feet of the shadows. And, that imagery, people don't want the truth. It affects their personal life. They want to believe a lie about sexuality. They want to believe what others teach, not what the Bible teaches, because it fits in their lifestyle. They want to believe, they're sincere and want to believe, but their sincerity blocks them from what God has said. So it doesn't change the lie into a truth because they're sincere. It doesn't change an opinion that has become an excuse. It doesn't change that into anything other than a refusal to believe. And Jesus made some hard sayings to people in John chapter 6. Peter and is standing there, and many, many, many of the followers of Jesus walk away. They walk away. And then Jesus doesn't run after them. He gives us the freedom to make our choices. That's what C.S. over and over. If God forced people to follow him, then it would be an unjust situation. He gives them the freedom. And so people say, why won't God make people? Why won't? No, because he empowered them as humans to make these choices. Many left, and Jesus said to Peter and the disciples, are you guys going to leave? John 6:66. I'll never forget, because it's 666. It's a haunting verse, because he basically said, do you want to be an apostate? Do you want to refuse to love the truth, love me? Do you want to walk away? Peter says this. I love it. Just Peter being, he says, where would we go? When you think of the alternative to truth in Jesus, yes, there's lots of places you could go, but none of them are truth. There's lots of other faiths and religion, but none of them are truth. Where would we go? Lord, you. It's not about an argument, and it's not about a question. You have the words of eternal life. If we walk away from you, we're walking away from the truth. We're walking away from the words of eternal life. So the danger of being an apostate is for all of us, the temptation. We had people leave our church that had been very involved in our church for a number of years, and they got into the teaching that Jesus wasn't God, and it contradicts the Bible. But because they chose not to love the truth, they ran after a lie, and it appealed to them, and whatever reason, the secret knowledge, they know something. Jesus said, you got to become like a little child. Take my truth as what it says. Believe my word as what it says, and don't mess with it. Let the truth stand. Love the truth. Love the God of the truth. Because if you don't, you've opened the door to deception, to lies that masquerade as good things. We're just a church that loves everybody. Well, we'll learn that there is unholy love as we get to some of the next teachings. So this apostate is an intellectual sinner. He sins with pride in the mind, pride in knowledge, pride in information and doctrines that he's developed that have led him away from even wanting to be in the presence of God. He'd rather be in the presence of his intellectual questions. Jesus is the answer, not giving us all of our blanks filled, but just knowing his love. It's an answer that gives life, not information. Let's pray together. Father, would you guard us from intellectual sins and knowledge that exalts itself against you, things that look wise in the eyes of the world but are foolishness to you. Help us be childlike in our faith, not stupid, not ignorant, not students, but humble, teachable, hungry, that when we ask a question, we really want to know the answer. It's not a debate or an excuse. It's a hunger to know you. Bless in this time of sharing, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless.